Hey developers, today we're going to look at how to use Vue.js authentication with Amazon Cognito. So this is the app we were creating. You can see here, it's really simple. I just have a username and password. I have a home and server. You can also create an account through here. And so I already created an account. So if I do test one and I try to sign in, you can see here I am now signed into my server, and if I click this server button, what this is doing is it's doing a call out, an authenticated call out to our AWS Lambda function and returning back some information from us. This is only returned to us since we're logged in and authenticated. And if you click sign out here, this server is actually, if I click on it, it's redirecting back to the front page here, this login page. So it only can be accessed if you're logged in. So that's Route Guard is protecting that. So we're going to go into this and we're going to set up the server. This is a code along, but I'll include a link below to some resources so you can set this up yourself. Before we begin, let's have a quick word from our sponsor. This video is brought to you by Coursera. Now, if you're not familiar with Coursera, they're an amazing teaching platform. They have dozens and dozens of very specialized, high-quality courses. The one I want to recommend to you today is Developing Applications with Google Cloud Platform. It's basically 4 courses in one. If you look in the description below, I have a link to the course. You can actually try out for free for 7 days, so make sure you do that. Make sure you click on that link so you can learn all about creating Google Cloud apps on the Google Cloud Platform. Check it out. Thanks. Okay, so here we are inside the application itself, and I went ahead and just created a brand new Vue application using Vue CLI 3. Here's what it looks like. This is out of the box Vue. Basically has a home and an about. Nothing too special here. And what I want to do is I have Visual Studio Code here. I'm going to go and install just a couple libraries. So to get up and running, we want to install npm install AWS Amplify and AWS Amplify Vue Beta. And so this will install the libraries we need to get up and running with AWS Amplify. Okay, everything's installed now. Now we need to use, and throughout this video, we're going to use the Amplify command line tool. And if you didn't see, I had a video on this. I'll link it here. I can link it in the description below, but basically we need to do npm install tacg AWS Amplify CLI, and that'll go ahead and install it. But since I did that, I won't do it again. And then after you have it installed, you can do amplify configure, and you just follow the on-screen prompts, and that'll basically connect your AWS account to the CLI so you can do some fun things with it. And like I said, if you want more information about that, I have a video I just did about that and configuring that. So after you have the Vue.js library and the Vue app installed, and you have those libraries installed, you can do run amplify init, and that's going to go ahead and add in a few folders. It's going to ask you questions. So I'm using Visual Studio Code, it's JavaScript, and it's a Vue app. And you can just hit enter through this. This is all defaulted. And it's asking you, do you want to use an AWS profile? Yes. And then I have one set up here for default. So I'm just going to use the default one. Okay, so you can see here now, if you look in the open editors on the right-hand side, you can see that we now have an Amplify RC file with some information about the buckets and roles that we have. And it also created a whole Amplify folder, which has our configuration. Now we can manually change this configuration, but we shouldn't have to. You might have to in more complicated projects. But let's go ahead and do the next step, and that's to add in auth. So to do that, you do amplify add auth. And it's going to ask you a few questions. So we're going to do yes. We're going to do the default configuration. And it goes ahead and just creates it for us. So now we can do Amplify Push, which will build all our local backend resources and provision it. So we'll do Amplify Push. And it's going to say, is this correct? You say yes. And it'll go ahead and create the Cognito account for you with some sensible defaults. You can certainly go back in later and change it all up, but just for this demo, I'll show you how it works with the defaults. Okay, so all the resources are now created, which is perfect. What we need to do now is, since everything's created, is to go ahead and set everything up. Now you can also see it added this AWS exports file, which is perfect, and we'll need that. So we need to go into the app view, the main.js file, and I'm just gonna copy and paste some information from another screen here. What this is saying right here is that we're gonna use import Amplify and Amplify modules from AWS Amplify. We're gonna import the Amplify plugin and the AWS exports file. Now this file has information about Incognito and some other information about Amazon, and that was created when we ran this add authentication. We're going to configure the AWS exports, and then we're going to use the Vue use. We're going to basically add the Amplify plugin and Amplify modules. Now, as of this writing, this is the way you're supposed to set it up. In the actual Vue documentation inside AWS, it was wrong. So maybe by the time this comes out, it'll be right. So this is the right way to configure it. So just keep that in mind if you're having problems. And I'll also include a link to this code in the description below, so you can follow along that way. Okay, so we have all the modules and everything inside here in our main.js file. And so what we can do now is I'm going to look at the hello world component, which is the default component here. And I'm going to delete a bunch of this information out. I'm basically delete all this. And if I save it again, now all we see is the two routes at the top and this V symbol for view, the image. And what's nice about AWS, this library, is that we can actually import in some out-of-the-box authentication pages. So I'll show you how that works. So I can import auth here from AWS Amplify. And once I do that, basically I have access to special components that only work with AWS Amplify. So I went and clicked on it here. You could see here's auth, and we have auth class, analytics class. If you look in the official documentation, so if we go to Amplify.js, AWS, and we look in the official documentation right here, and we look at Vue, docs, JavaScript, Vue, you see here's the wrong way to do the exports. Don't do it that way. But you could see here that there is some common components for authenticator components. So there's Amplify Authenticator, which basically gives you the sign up, sign in page, confirm page. But then there's a sign in page if you just want to use that. There's a confirm sign in page. There's also a sign up page. So it's really cool. And then of course, if we didn't want to use any of these built-in components, we can just build it ourselves with using this Amplify. There's basically an auth plugin that you can use, which we won't look at today, but we'll just use the built-in ones for now, just to show how it works. So I'm going to close this. And so in this hello world, we're going to use this Amplify Authenticator. And then we're going to use the Amplify Sign Out. And if we save that and we look back, now we have our login page kind of built in handily already right here. So we didn't really do anything other than adding in those two components. So now I can create a new account. So it says no account, sign up. I'm going to create one called test. Test one. And put in just a real simple password. Now you can configure this in Incognito if you require an email address, or you can actually combine it. So instead of asking for a username, it asks for an email address instead. You can get rid of the phone number. It's all configurable. 775, 555, 1212. And then I'll just click create account. I'll put in this one you actually have to put in a real email address. So I'll put in one of my email addresses, erikhanchettblog@gmail.com. I'll click create account. And I won't show you, but it actually did send me an email on my actual email for Erik Hanchett blogs. So I'm going to go get that email, and it's going to have a ID, a code number. And so I'm just going to paste that code right here and then confirm. And now it's asking me to log in. So I'll do ASDF. So I just made I hit sign in, And basically I'm signed in at this point. So it's signed in, and now I have access to do a lot of things. So obviously at this point, this is kind of boring, but you see here now I'm logged in. Now I don't want to show, if I hit sign out here, you can see I still have the sign out button here. So I definitely don't want to show it even though I'm signed out. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to check to see if I'm signed in or signed out. So I'm going to add in through here, I'm going to add in a methods. And inside this methods, I'm going to create an async find user. And so I'm going to do a try catch block here. I'm going to catch an error. And then I'm going to create a user. I'm going to wait it. And I'm going to use this auth that I had before. And I can do something called current authenticated user, which is like this. And this will actually get the current authenticated user for us. Then I can basically create, I'm going to create a new string called signed in. Set it to false. So I'm going to just do this dot signed in equals true. And I'll console log the user just to see what it looks like. Otherwise, I'm going to put this dot signed in equals false. And that should be it. One other thing I want to do, this will only, I'm going to run this, I'm going to put this in the created hook. So I'll create a created hook here. This actually gets ran whenever the application, the Vue app starts. And inside here, I'm just going to run find user. So this will run and check to see if the user is authenticated as soon as the route loads, but the app loads, the component loads. But I really want to also check to see if it changes. So this is where I can use something called Amplify Events. It's called Amplify Event Bus. And I'm going to do $on. And I need to import that, otherwise it won't work. So I'm going to import the Amplify Event Bus. And then I'm going to import that from AWS Amplify Vue. And now that I have access to it, I can check for different events that happen in the Amplify world here. So I can check for auth state. And then when that happens, I'm going to get an info object. So this is basically whenever the user logs in or logs out, this auth state will get triggered. So I can say if info equal signed in, then we want to set the state. We can actually do this. We can do this dot find user, might be easier. Then else, we just want to put this dot signed in equals false. So I'm going to save it there. And now I have this new signed in. So let's just put the signed in here and see if it works. And I'm going to save it. Reload it. And you can see right down at the bottom, I think you can see it there. It says false. But if I sign in with my new account, you see now it's true. So if I hit sign out, it's back to false. So now I can use that to do just a really simple check to see if the user is signed in or out or not by just doing a vif. So I'll do, we'll do a div and put another div here. And we'll just do if not signed in. So they're not signed in. We want to show the sign in. And then this will be vf signed in. Okay, so I have that all in place now. So if it's not signed in, it shows the Amplify Authenticator. If it is signed in, then it shows sign out. So now you see there's a false at the bottom, which I'll go ahead and delete, but there's no sign out. So now if I sign in, now you can see just see sign out, but if you get it, then it gets rid of the sign out. So we can see now we are keeping track of the sign in and sign out. One other thing we could do if we wanted to is we can check this user right here. So this authenticated user returns a user that we can then save somewhere if we wanted to. Oops, we have one error here. What we need to do is instead of having in props, we're going to put it in data. And we're going to return it. And that's going to have the signed in equals false here. And that way we don't see any errors in the console. So now it's working as we expect it. You might see this little error right here, but don't worry about that. It's just the way the Cognito works because we're not authenticated. One other thing we can do then is we have this really simple signed in and signed out, but let's say we want to check to see if the user, we want to use the signed in user to grab something from Cognito. So let's do that. So let's take a look at our console. So we go back to our console here. We can go ahead and do Amplify add function. And it's going to ask you to the resource name and then the Lambda name. We're going to call it Vue YouTube. And then it's going to ask you what type of, do you want to do a hello world type function or CRUD function or serverless express function integrated with Amazon API Gateway. So we're going to do this one, the serverless express function. Do you want to edit the local Lambda now? We can hit yes, true. So here it is right here. So here is the serverless function that it created. So I can go ahead and change it. So let me change this /items to, I don't know, /m. I'll save it. And then you can press enter here. And now I can go ahead and push it. So I'm going to do Amplify Push. We'll do, actually before that, we'll do Amplify function build. And you can actually build the serverless function locally. And then I could test it if I want, but I haven't set up the tests. I can invoke it and actually test it, but instead we're going to go ahead and Amplify Push it. And that's going to go ahead and push it. And you can see here it already has the Cognito that doesn't have any changes, but it's going to now push this serverless function, this Lambda function up. While it's pushing the server up, the Lambda function up, one thing I kind of want to do real quickly is I want to go to the store. And in the state function right here, I'm going to add in user, which is going to be the user of our, the user information, which we'll just put it null for now. And then I want to put in signed in to false. So we're going to track this as states inside our Vuex store. Now I should probably add some actions and mutations, but we're just going to edit the store directly just for the purposes of this demo. Obviously you wouldn't want to do this in production. So what I'm going to do here is instead of tracking this through this signed in here, the signed in function here, I'm going to track it inside here. We're going to basically, after this else here, we're going to do this dot store dot state dot signed in, make that false, and then we're going to set the user to false too if there's a problem, state dot user to null, and then inside here we're going to do the same thing. So instead of doing the signed in true here, we'll do this dot store dot state dot signed in equals true, and then this dot store dot state dot user equals user. And then in the catch, we'll take these two, and instead of user, we'll put it false and null. And then we'll put this right here. And then we'll use a computed property instead of the signed in. So we'll have a computed property here, which we'll make sure we put this. We'll call this signed in. And then this will just return this dot store dot state dot signed in. And it should work the same way. So if we refresh it, seems to be still working. So I'll put in my user I'll sign up. Okay, cool. We're signed in. Here's our Cognito user, by the way, that we're putting to the console. Looks good. So we'll sign out. And what we want to do is make another change here. So we're going to go into our router file. Well, first we want to go into the app view, and we have about. I just want to put server. So we're going to look at our Lambda function here. And we'll be lazy. We're just going to leave it the about route, but now it's going to say server here. And then inside here, it's using this lazy loading, which was fine for now, but now it says server at the top. And then we can look, it has this view called about, which is basically just showing a template, because it's in the views, but we're going to treat this just like a normal component. So this is server information. So now if we refresh it, this is server information. And if we check our Lambda, it looks like it went ahead and created the Lambda function. So I want to make sure that this Lambda function, let's make sure we can talk to it. So first we want to do is go in the AWS console and look at the API gateway. I don't have any APIs set in here, but if I go here and then check my Lambda function, you can see here's the view YouTube. So this is where my Lambda function's at. So it's created as we expect it. You can see here, this is the code. If you look in the app.js, we have /m, so that's what we put in there. So we're going to go and create the gateway. So I'm going to go to API gateway. I'm going to do this pretty quickly, but so if you are confused, just you can stop this video and look at it. This is just a real quick demonstration. I'm going to go get started with API gateway. I'm going to do new API. I'm going to call it Erik API YouTube. I'm just going to create it. So now I have nothing in here. We're going to create a resource, and we're going to configure it as a proxy. We're going to enable API cores and create resource. And basically what this does is it creates a proxy, and we're going to proxy it to our Lambda function. So if you look here, view YouTube, there it is. I'm going to save it. Okay, gives permissions to it so we can connect to it. So here it is. And now we need to deploy it. Okay, so we need to go click actions up here and go to deploy API. We're going to do a new stage. We're going to call it V1. And we're going to hit deploy here. And that gives you an URL. So if we take this URL and we just paste it, we get missing token. But if we know that it was /m, now we can see here, get call succeed. So we could tell it's working if we just call it normally. But we want it behind the Cognito, so that way you can only get to it if you're authenticated. So to add that, we go back to our management. To do that, we go back to the API gateway. And then what we'll want to do is we'll create an authorizer, create new authorizer. We're going to call it authorize. And it's going to do it to the Cognito pool that we just created, which we need to take a look at to see which one it is. I believe it's this one. And then it asks you the token source, so we're going to do called authorization, and we're going to create it. And now we can go back to our resources, go back to our proxy here, and then we can change the authentication here. So we hit the drop down here, and it doesn't display it, so sometimes I have to refresh right here for some reason. So we go back to proxy, any method request, authentication. So now it says the authorize. I'm going to save it. And perfect. So now it's in there. It's all authorized. And just to make sure things are okay, I'm going to actually deploy it. So I'm going to do deploy API. All right. So everything's deployed. So now here, if I refresh it, it gives me unauthorized. So I'm no longer authorized to get it unless I send the Cognito token. So now what we can do here is inside our, we're going to export default, and I'm going to do a method. We're going to look at the created hook again. And just to make sure this is working, make sure to put a script tag to surround this all. Great, so now we're going to do Axios. So I need to install Axios, which should be npm install Axios. Great, and so now Axios is installed. Actually, I'm gonna make this a mounted hook. And then we can do import, I'll do it up here. Import Axios from Axios. And I'll go ahead and just paste in the code here to do the Axios call, because this video is getting a little long. Okay, great. So what I did here off camera is I have this mounted hook. What I'm doing is I'm checking the store to see if the user exists. If it does exist, then I'm grabbing the user, that Cognito user, which is this guy right here, and it has a bunch of methods on it. And then I'm getting the sign-in user session, I'm getting the ID token, I'm getting the JWT token. I'm creating a config for the header, because if you remember when we set up the authorization, it asked me for what kind of header I wanted. I put authorization, we're going to send the JWT token, and then I'm doing an axios.get, which I'm pasted in that URL from here, that unauthorized one that you saw. And then I'm passing in the header for the config for the JWT token, and then I'm setting, if it comes back as a good result, I'm setting this new data, which I have info, to what's being sent back, and then I'm displaying it in info.data. So now you can see here, this is if I click here, I go ahead and this goes ahead and sets the user information, and if I click server, now I have the information from the server. This get call succeeded, which is from my serverless function, so we know it's working, which is pretty easy. If we do this again, but let's say we remove the config so we don't send it, you'll get a 401 error that basically says, it gives you a no access allow control error, but basically it's an error that says 401, you can't receive the information. So that's obviously why we have to make sure we send the config along with the authorization header, and that way it'll work after we click there. So that is just a real quick way of setting up authentication using Amazon Cognito. We could, one last thing we could do is if we're in the router here, we could set this up as this about route to be protected. So that's, so I'll show you how to do that real quickly. So I'm going to delete this code splitting in here, and I'm just going to put component about, which I'm going to import in. So it works the same, but what we could do is we can make this server, this about route protected. So instead of, we can essentially do this. So just give me a second. I'll go ahead and update it, and then you guys can see on the video here. Okay, so basically what I had to do here, and I'll have a link below with this code, by the way. So I have this router before resolve here, which is a route guard. And inside this route guard, I'm matching to see if I put this meta tag on this about page that requires auth equals true. And basically it's saying if the two match sum, so basically if this requires auth and it's true, then do this. Otherwise, go to next. So otherwise, just show, if it doesn't have it, just go ahead and route to it. Otherwise, what we're doing is we're checking this Amplify auth current authenticated user to see if they have any information in there. So if they're authenticated. If they're not authenticated, then we redirect them back to this slash path. Otherwise, we redirect them to the authenticated path. So if we refresh this here and we go up to the top, if we click server, it says not authenticated, and it routed back to this main route right here. Okay, so you hit server, it redirects back to the to this route here. But if we log in and we sign in here and we click server, now it shows the server information as we expect. So that's the last thing I wanted to show you guys, just how to do a quick authenticated route. If you guys have any questions, leave a comment below. I went through pretty quickly here, but I think you can see how the power of Vue.js and the power of this Amplify library. Thanks.